Hello and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I serve as your host 2 times a week on Tuesdays and Fridays, now 6 years running, where twice weekly we have the privilege of interviewing some of the world's most influential and impactful thought leaders, creators, artists, authors, people that have run companies, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, CEOs, members of boards of directors from every walk of life. The purpose of this podcast is to make you a better leader at work, in your businesses, in your communities, in your families, whether you are formal or informal. Franklin Covey's mission is to inspire greatness in people and organizations everywhere, and they are the world's most trusted leadership firm and give me the privilege to shine their spotlight on to these amazing guests each week. Today, our guest is Ramit Sethi. He is a best-selling author. He's a podcast host, a creative, a coach, a speaker, and today his book is going to be our focus, Money for Couples. Now get this promise: no more stress, no more fights, hallelujah, just a 10-step plan to create your rich life together. Ramit, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You know, after 30 years of a corporate career, including being an officer of a global public company here at Franklin Covey, I've always sort of felt like these books were for other people, right? I mean, I know term versus whole. I know what a 401k is and capital gains. I know when and how to sell a home. I understand compound interest. And then I read your book and kind of got humbled because you were teaching me things I didn't know, if you will, the psychology of the conversation, the 4 money types in a marriage, if you will, and how to deal with the other type. And I learned so much from you. I think you have brought a whole different perspective to the conversation of personal finance, because we've interviewed anybody who's everybody who's written about it. So very encouraged about our coming conversation. Today, I'd like to rewind a little bit, and would you indulge me and our listeners and viewers and talk a bit about your path? Who are you? You were born where, and then what happened next?
Yeah, I was born in California, and 20 years ago, I started my business. I started it from my dorm room, and I had been an unusually precocious kid in the sense that I was a teenager in the late 90s, and back then, everybody was investing in the stock market. Everybody thought they were a genius because they would put their money in, and 2 weeks later, they would have increased it 35%. Kind of sounds familiar if we think about it. I took some of my college scholarship money and I invested it in the stock market. And I was also humbled because I lost half of that money immediately. And I realized I wasn't as smart as I thought, and I wanted to learn how money worked. So there I am in college learning about money, at the same time studying social influence, persuasion, psychology. And I realized so much of the advice that we get about money treats us like we are robots. It treats people like they run their lives based on a spreadsheet, and money is anything but based purely on a spreadsheet. When I was younger, I wanted to buy a round of drinks for my friends. I wanted to go out, travel, have a good time. And I started trying to teach my friends in college about personal finance. If we fast forward 20 years, I've built an entire business with best-selling book, a Netflix show, and so on. But the crux of it is not about cutting back on lattes. It's not about restriction. My philosophy is on how to spend money extravagantly on the things you love, as long as you cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't, in order to live a rich life.
Amit, you host, in addition to authoring books and speaking and coaching, you host a very popular podcast. And in the opening of this current book, Money for Couples, you list 8 really compelling ideas of things that you've learned on your podcast. Before we get into this book, I want to touch on them because they're shockingly close to home and really inspiring. One is 50% of couples you've spoken to don't know their income, and 100% of couples with credit card debt have difficulty saying no to their children. Let me keep going. The overwhelming number of people who come on the podcast who describe their financial problems as a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 have not read a single book on personal finance. You talk about a shockingly high number of couples with credit card debt have very specific purchases, known as Apple Watches and iPads with cellular connections. Like my favorite thing in the world, next to my dog. I mean, my wife is my iPad with my cellular connection. Men call themselves the provider, and women are taught to keep, quote, a secret savings account just in case. You talk about shopping at Target, and people get into financial trouble for two reasons: purchasing houses and trucks. You say, I'm sorry, vehicles. Riff a little bit on what are some of these similar patterns you see that get in the way of marital bliss?
The first is that we like to think if something is important to somebody, then they will spend time and attention on it. That's a nice dream, but the fact is most of us focus on what is in front of us. So we get up, eat breakfast, maybe get the kids ready, go to work, try to do a good job, come home, put the kids to bed, maybe spend a little time with our spouse, and that is a good day. And I don't blame anybody for that. There's a lot of demands coming at us. But it is very common that people come to me, typically between the age of 38 to 42. And they come to me almost frantically. And they say, Ramit, what's the best account to set up for my son or my daughter? Is it a 529? Is it a government bond? What is it? I go, congratulations on the new baby. Before we get into that, tell me about your finances. And they will almost be shaken out of it. They'll go, well, it's not in a great place, really. I just kind of got started recently on my money. But what's the best account? Is it a 529? The truth, and the thing that I tell them is, your children have time. You have much less. And what they are really admitting, particularly young parents, is I have lost the game of money for myself, but I'm not going to allow my kid to lose it. What we see there is that, of course, your kid's financial security is important to you. Of course, your own financial security is important to you. But the majority of Americans have not read a single book on personal finance. Even my own audience, who's been following me for decades, has not read my own book. I don't blame them. It's simply something that is easier to do another day. And what I want to emphasize to people is that we have been taught that money is boring, restrictive, onerous. And I actually see it totally the opposite. You look at money, you might see a spreadsheet, you might see a bunch of confusing terms. I see a family trip to Disneyland. I see the ability for one parent to stay home, perhaps take care of the kids. I see the ability for a couple to connect on money, which is exactly why I wrote this book.
You know, Amit, in your book, you ask an opening question: are you the, quote, money person in your relationship? My wife and I have what might be termed a fairly traditional marriage. We've been married 15 years. I am the provider and she is the manager caretaker. We have 3 young boys that are 10, 12, and 14. So my wife, through her own volition, has foregone a career, well-educated, could have out-earned me should she wanted to. But she's decided to, stay home, shepherd these boys through a tough world. But she also manages our money, not invests it, but she manages, pays all the bills, and manages all the money. This morning, I was sitting talking to her, and there's actually 13 years difference almost in our age, almost different generations, quite frankly. And this morning, we were talking about who I was interviewing this week on the podcast. And I don't know, 4 or 5 guests over the course of the next 4 or 5 days, and I was talking about you. And I was saying, I feel like if you're a responsible provider, you kind of should be stressed, because if you understand, how much money you need to live in the future, it's kind of daunting, and college education and term insurance and a liability on policy in case your kids, hit someone in their car, which they will, including, healthcare expenses. And it can be kind of daunting. If you actually sober up and look at what it will take to make sure you're not living in a box when you're 75 years old, it can actually be kind of daunting. How do you find couples when one is much more astute in earning and thinking long-term and one is maybe a little more short-term? Any advice? Because I bet that describes a lot of relationships for us.
Very common. I first want to say I so appreciate you even bringing up the topic of money and relationships, and of course bringing up my book and my material in your family. That to me is the ultimate prize for an author, that someone is talking about it, in this case, talking with your wife. I really appreciate that. Couples often, in fact, almost always have one person who is the money person. I consider this a mistake, and let me tell you why. Of course, there will always be someone who is more knowledgeable. There will often be one partner who earns more than the other. That's totally fine. But we want to consider that money is not like emptying the dishwasher, where typically one person in a relationship does it, or watering the plants. Money is much more like parenting. It is something that cannot be only delegated to one partner. It cuts across everything: where you live, what you eat, what kind of relationship you might have with children and other loved ones, indeed, who you are. And so when my wife and I started talking about money, it would have been very easy for me to be the money person. After all, this is my line of work. But I told her from day one, I don't want to do that. I want us both to be involved. I want a partner in this. And I'll tell you why. One, I want a second set of eyes because I might not always make the best decisions. Two, one day I'm going to get hit by a bus. And I don't want some very expensive wealth management firm knocking on the door like vultures taking advantage of my wife. And three, it's just a lot more fun when both partners are talking about it and planning and making trade-offs, really designing that rich life. So you can always have one person who's more knowledgeable with investments or different type insurance, but I believe it is critical that both partners understand the big picture, contribute to designing that rich life, and are involved on a monthly basis during your monthly money review.
Ramit, in a moment, we're going to talk about the 4 money types, but you also then follow in the book, you talk about having your first positive conversation about money. And I love some of the examples here because these are conversations we all fall into. I can't afford that. I don't want that. Why would you want to buy that? Talk about how important it is to almost relaunch your relationship and your conversation about money by deliberately having, maybe tonight, your first positive conversation about money with your partner.
I've spoken to couples that have been married 25 years and they have never had one single substantive conversation about money. They've fought about it. They've said, I can't believe you spent that much at Target, but they've never really sat down and said, what's it all for? What do we get for all this work that we've put in? What do we want our money to be used for in our rich life? That's a conversation that's not talked about in the media. When we think about money, we're typically taught it's a spreadsheet, it's confusing terms, and don't ever spend money until you're 95 years old. So I have created a way to have your first positive conversation. Maybe you are newly in a relationship. Maybe you've been married 15 years and you want to recalibrate it. Here's the key. In this conversation, you don't have to solve it all. In fact, you don't even talk about any numbers. You're certainly not going to start off by saying it's really important that we pay off this debt, because that's just a drag. Nobody wants to talk about that, especially not on the first conversation. So it's really 4 key points. You start off by saying, you know what? In the past, I think that I haven't connected with you when it comes to money. I think I might have been a little heavy-handed. I think I haven't listened as much as I could, but I'd love to find a way to connect with you over money. And I think this conversation is going to be awesome because we can actually both dream about what we want to use our money for. That's part 1, why this conversation is going to be awesome. Part 2, how I feel about money. Right now, I feel overwhelmed. I feel behind. I also feel excited. How about you? Notice that we're tossing the ball. A lot of times when I'm speaking to couples on my podcast, I notice there's a lot of monologues. We want to make it a dialogue. Number 3, how I want to feel about money. I want to feel in control. I want to feel connected. I want to feel fun. Okay, how about you? And then finally, when should we talk about money next? That's it. We're not talking about debt. We're not talking about 529s for our kids. We're not talking about any of that. It's literally, here's why this is going to be awesome. Here's how I feel. Here's how I want to feel. When should we talk next? That's it.
I mean, in many ways, you are a therapist for couples. I think once I read that 2 of the, if not the main causes of marital divorce are death of a child and finances, far be over infidelity and things like that. I interviewed a colleague of yours, Morgan Housel, of course, wrote the book, The Psychology of Money. It's such a great book. And he says in the book, and it may have been a quote of somebody else, he wrote something along the lines of, we spend too much time buying things we don't want or need to impress people we don't like or even care about. And that's so true, is it not? I'm guessing you talk a lot to couples around what does money mean to them? What is their relationship with it? How much of your spending is through the social mirror and keeping up with the Joneses? Is there anything you'd like, if everybody had a barrier around them that was sort of like a floaty in the pool, and you could uncork it and like diffuse it right now, is there something that everybody needs permission to let go that might help their relationship or their relationship with their spouse or partner, or that with money, because they've got one of these social mirror kind of pressures pushing on them?
Well, we are all social animals, and there's nothing wrong with spending on things you love because they make you happy. This is one of the biggest myths of the personal finance world, that you should become almost monastic in your use of money, that you should never spend on clothes because that's frivolous. I don't believe that. I love nice clothes. I love a nice sweater. My philosophy, of course, is to spend extravagantly on the things you love, as long as you cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. However, in order to live a rich life, you got to know two things. Number one, you have to know your numbers. And that means you have to know the 4 key numbers on your conscious spending plan. You've got to know your net worth. You should know the month and year that your debt will be paid off. Again, we need to understand the basic language of money. The second thing that is often neglected is you have to master your money psychology. So it's not enough to simply accumulate money. I talk to people every day who have accumulated hundreds of thousands, even millions and millions, and they still worry about money. They believe if I just get $50,000 more, then I'll finally stop worrying. Truth is, you never will, unless you master your money psychology. Scott, I love what you said about the way we see money. If I had a chance to sit down with the listeners today, I would ask them a question that a therapist asked my wife and me when we were having a tough time over money. She said, how do you see money? And she asked me first. To me, this was the easiest question in the world. How do I see money? Growth. So easy. I could literally see the formulas running in front of my eyes because I'm a freak optimizer. Then she turns to my wife and asks the same question. My wife said, safety. I looked at her like, what? Safety? That's like saying beef. Like, it's just a random word. I did not understand her connection with it because I haven't thought about money and safety in 25 years. So that was such a beautiful way of bringing us together to help us understand we see money differently. We can still live a rich life together, but I needed to take a second and truly understand where my wife was coming from.
I'm going to date myself here, but 30 years ago, I once heard Susie Orman say, I think it was actually on Phil Donahue, I really dated myself. She said, open your wallet right now, and I want you to look at your money, your paper money, and how your money is in your wallet will tell me exactly how you budget and spend your money, whether it's your money is all straight up and facing, whether it's all crushed in. And I remember I started ironing my money. I was a waiter, like in a restaurant 30 years ago, and I would take it home, my tips, I would iron my money out and put it all nicely in my wallet because I wanted to be more proud of my relationship with money. I'm guessing you see that example metaphorically unfold in a lot of people's lives.
Yes, I love that example, and I love Susie Orman's example there. She was such a great pioneer for talking about money openly, unapologetically. Yeah. I also love that you ironed your money. It's no wonder you made it to the top because you cared about the details. I can tell a lot about someone. One, if I walk into their living room, it tells me so much, so much. How much stuff do they have? What is the central focus of the room? And on and on. That's very clear. I can also tell a lot when I look at their conscious spending plan. I don't use a budget. I don't love budgets. I find them laborious and pointless. But I do teach people how to use 4 numbers, just 4, that help them understand where they are stacking up, if they are saving and investing enough, and actually how they can spend money guilt-free. When I look at somebody's guilt-free spending and someone's conscious spending plan, I can tell so much. I can tell, are they overspenders? Do they eat out a lot because they prioritize it? Or do they eat out so much that they are in credit card debt? I can tell their education level. I can often tell if they live in a city, a rural environment, suburban. There's so much you can see about somebody's life fingerprints just from a few numbers. And I'm reminded of that phrase, show me somebody's calendar and I will tell you their priorities. My updated version would be show me somebody's calendar and conscious spending plan, and I will show you their values.
Okay, in the book, I fell in love with these 4 money types, and I was thinking about my wife, Stephanie, and myself. You name them as the avoider, the optimizer, the worrier, and the dreamer. And more than just 4 archetypes, you talk about how to meet with and talk to and be in love with someone who's a different type than you are. Let's spend some time talking about these. Maybe you could define, I'll pitch them back to you. You could define what does the profile look like, maybe what are their priorities and values, and then if someone says, oh my gosh, that's my husband, maybe you could spend a minute and say, and here's how best to converse with them. First, money type you call the avoider.
Avoider is the most common. In America, we avoid money. And avoiders use a series of conscious and unconscious strategies to avoid money. They will say phrases like, you're better at money, you should handle it, honey. I'm just not good at math. Or, why do you always want to talk about money? Can't we just have a nice evening together? All of these conscious and unconscious strategies allow them to continue avoiding money. You will typically also find that the partner of an avoider has entered into a chaser-avoider dynamic. The more partner 1 avoids, the more partner 2 chases, which causes partner 1 to further avoid. Now, this is just such a common dynamic. And the fact is, most people can get by just fine avoiding their money for years. Roof is still over their head, cable is still on, life is fine until it's not. And my feedback to avoiders is to gently ask them, what are you getting out of being an avoider? Because they are getting something. Next, what will happen if you keep avoiding for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And finally, if you have children, what are your children learning? You will often find, for example, if dad is an avoider, you will often see mom chasing, becoming frustrated, etc. And children will pick up on that and say to themselves, oh, if I'm a young boy, boys don't need to worry about money because mom's going to be the one who takes care of it. And they carry that into the next generation. Now, when I point this out to couples, that typically is what really gets them, especially avoiders, because they realize every day they are avoiding, they are cementing that relationship with their children. And that's typically what helps them want to make a change.
Parenting is so daunting because all of our problems reside in our origin story, what we learned from our parents. Some are epigenetics, but much our origin story. And it's so very true that as a parent, you have to be so thoughtful of how you manage and deal with money because it is crucial to raising healthy, balanced, wise, smart, in-control children about their own relationship. The first is avoider. What do you do if your spouse is the avoider? Any tips on how best to meet them where they are, but recognize you can't chase it for 25 years. It won't
That's
work.
correct. Yes, I have so much advice in the book about it because this is the most common archetype. And the first thing is having that first positive conversation about money, where you don't blame, you don't jump into the weeds about how much they spent at the gas station last week. None of that. It's going to the North Star. Hey, how do we want to use money in our relationship? What would it be like if money were fun for both of us? And also it is being prepared for them to derail the conversation, for them to use a variety of techniques to simply try to shut it down. And you just listen and you just let them talk, and then you go right back to your North Star. You do not get dragged into the weeds. The key technique here, though, to deal with an avoider is to emphasize, I want your help as a financial partner. I expect it, setting expectations and standards in a relationship, and then to give them a small amount of responsibility, always expecting that they might fail and making a plan for what to do when that happens. I lay out all the specific details in the book. The key here is you've got to tell them what you want. And I hate that you have to take on the emotional labor and the burden, but if you want this to change, unfortunately, you have to take that role on. Set the expectation, make it clear what you want them to do, get their buy-in, and then be prepared in case they don't follow through because you can help them get back on track.
Ramit, 4 money types. The avoider, next is the optimizer. If you'll talk about who and what that person feels and sounds like, and then how do they better deal with their partner if that's describing them, not themselves.
I have a soft spot for optimizers because I am one. Optimizers love to run a spreadsheet model. Oh, what's it going to be? What if I get 7.2% instead of 7.8%? What about another Monte Carlo analysis? The problem, well, the good news is that optimizers can often build a lot of financial success. They're planning for things. They love to add contingencies, all of that. The problem is that optimizers are boring. They live their life in a spreadsheet. They're constantly thinking about the future, rarely living in the present, always worried about what can go wrong. And often it's a drag to their partner. Partner's like, why are you always talking about money? Why are you always talking about the cost of something? You take it to a logical extreme, these optimizers won't even buy a sandwich for their family because if you compound that sandwich, $11 over the next 45 years at a 7% post-inflation return actually ends up being $1,200. Nobody wants to live that horrible life. So optimizers should be celebrated for their skills in getting you to a certain place. That's great. However, it's also time to turn the page and realize you've won that game and there's a different game to play. That game is a game of connectedness, of joy, of experimentation and adventure. That is what money can provide to you beyond what's in your spreadsheet.
Talk to the third money type, the worrier.
The worrier is very common. They worry about money reflexively. They worry about it if they have $200,000 in student loan debt. They continue to worry about it once they pay that debt off, accumulate even millions of dollars. I routinely speak to multimillionaires who worry about the price of blueberries. For some reason, rich people are obsessed with how much berries cost. And I talk to them all the time. And they genuinely believe if I just have this much more, I will stop worrying. And I look them dead in the eye and I say, it's never going to happen. And they are shaken. No one's ever talked to them like that. I tell them, I know point blank, it's not going to happen. You're not going to stop worrying. You love worrying. Because if you didn't worry, who would you be? And many of them realize they have worried since they were born. They often inherited that worry from their parents. Often their mom or dad would say things like, we can't afford it. It's never going to be enough. How are we going to make ends meet? And they carry that with them, even though they themselves may become, quote, financially successful. They have not done the second part of living a rich life, which is to master their money psychology. So with worriers, I help them understand how much money you have. What does that money mean? Many people don't know what their net worth actually means. Will I have enough? I give them very clear answers. And then I help them start to build the skills of spending money meaningfully. You'll notice that in our culture, everybody teaches you how to save. Nobody teaches you how to spend money meaningfully, which happens to be a special interest of mine.
Ramit, let's go a bit deeper on this. I think that's me. I think I'm the worrier. I am the sole provider financially in our family, which, in and of itself, there's some, weight around that. I was raised in an upper middle class family in the 70s. My mom did not work outside the home. My father was the sole provider. We had everything we needed and very little of what we wanted. We were a very stable family. But I think I was raised probably in a worry family, and I've taken that on. In all of the interviews, all the podcasts, all the couples you've talked with, what's the best way you have found, or a healthy way, to first own your type, and then to decide, how is this working for me? How is this working against me? How is it working for or against my partner? Do you have any elixirs you might offer us to say?
Let's do it right now. Okay, Scott, what do you get out of worrying about money?
Probably some control. I get that no one is going to act upon me because I'm going to realize it first. It's my responsibility.
Yes. I love that. Okay, so responsibility and control, that's great. Can we take that control for a second and can we look at it through a different lens? What if you were in control of your money, but you didn't worry? What words would you use to describe what someone who's in control but doesn't worry looks and feels like?
Nirvana, harmony, joy, peace, butterflies, cupcakes, and puppy dogs.
Okay, fair enough. But in all seriousness, I don't worry about money, but I am in control of my money. Can you think of an example in your life where you are in control of something, but you don't, quote, worry about it?
I am in control of my reputation, but I don't worry about it because I'm in control of it.
I love that. Why is that?
Because I am a fairly public person. I'm fairly deliberate with what I say and what I write and what I post. And I recognize with that territory comes some of trolls and vitriol, and I just compartmentalize that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you've been doing this for decades. You're very good at what you do. You're thoughtful about what you say. And you also allow for the fact that because you have a big platform, there's going to be certain things that come your way that
That's right.
you didn't ask for.
That's
Okay.
right.
If we apply that to money, can you see any connection if you were to be in control of money but not worry?
Yes, I think the issue on the money side is, to quote you, I've not defined how much is enough, and therefore I'll
Yes.
never have enough. On reputation, I've defined how much is enough.
That's exactly right. Most people do not know how much enough is. In fact, I can tell you out of my own personal friends, personal relationships, fewer than 5 people have told me they have enough. Now, I know a lot of wealthy people, but even they have not defined what enough is. To me, if you haven't defined what enough is, you have just entered yourself on an endless escalator where you will simply forever work harder and harder, feeling worse and worse, and never reaching the destination. It's a terrible way to live. Instead, this is a beautiful place to start having a conversation with your wife. Now, she may not be doing the investment strategy in your family, but having that conversation, a series of them, and saying, what is our rich life? What do we want to do in the next 10 years that would make our life incredibly meaningful and rich? What kind of values do we want to pass on? How do we want to use money to help bolster those? Now, a lot of couples, especially I'm assuming the ones who listen, are probably pretty intentional about talking about family values, family culture, etc. But we often neglect the money part. And when my wife and I talk about money, of course, we're talking about values and experiences, but we're also asking that extra question. How can we use money to live those faster, bigger, richer, more inclusively? Those are the questions that I would start to ask in your household. You can make it a partnership thing. You can even involve your kids at a certain point. But when you do that and you start thinking about a vision, a rich life vision, worry, it doesn't go away, but it simply becomes one taste in your taste buds, and you can add on new ones like adventure, experimentation, generosity.
Ramit, I think many people of my generation value their money by showing it.
Okay.
Meaning instead of buying Nordstrom stock, they're buying Nordstrom shoes because you can't wear a stock certificate on your foot. I guess you could tape it to it, but I'm guessing you deal a lot with people whose self-worth, sadly, or their self-esteem or their self-confidence, including my own, that is somewhat attached to the style of home you own or the car, or the clothes you wear, or the handbag your wife takes to dinner. The golden question, how do you help people create balance to that, right? I mean, most wives want a nice handbag, most husbands want a nice car. I don't mean to stereotype, but we all have some currency in which it makes us feel better. To your point, that's not always a bad thing, unless it's bankrupting you or causing stress or you're getting divorced because you've got too many trucks or your wife has too many Gucci purses. What advice would you give us on finding that balance?
I might be the first money person you've ever heard that has no problem with someone buying $1,000 coat, taking a beautiful, extravagant vacation, or spending extra on their kids' school photos. I have no issue with it. In fact, I often speak to couples and I encourage them to spend more because I look at their numbers, I help understand their rich life vision, and I realize they're underspending. However, we've got to know our numbers. If you don't know your key numbers, if you don't know what percentage of your money you are spending, for example, on fixed costs, then how can you make a decision about buying a handbag or taking a trip or buying a truck? two areas that people overspend on. They're always consistent. Number one, people overspend on their house. They literally have no idea how to decide how much they can afford. They let their mortgage broker tell them, which is the worst possible thing you could do. And they don't understand ratios like 28% of gross income should typically be responsible for your total housing cost. They never heard that. Secondly, a car. I'll ask people, how did you decide how much you could afford on this car or truck? And they'll say, I went to the car dealer and they told me, what do you want to pay on a monthly basis? Again, horrible way to make a decision. And the irony is people will overspend by thousands, often hundreds of thousands for these major purchases, but they will agonize over the price of a bag of chips at the grocery store. It's focusing on $3 questions when we should be focusing on $30,000 questions. So there are a couple of four numbers you need to get right. You need to sit down with your partner. It's almost like Tetris. Here are the numbers. You decide if you want to spend $2,000 on this trip or get a BMW, fantastic. As long as it fits, that's up to you, but it's got to fit. And until you know those key numbers, you will simply be making decisions based on how shiny something is or how nice it is. Again, I don't mind if you want to buy a beautiful shirt or a trip, but you've got to make sure you know your numbers.
Ramit, I've had the privilege in 6 years of interviewing anyone who's written a substantial book on personal finance or money, and I've read all their books, and by far this is, I think, the most engaging conversation I've been the privilege of interviewing. Let's finish this off. 4 money types: avoider, optimizer, worrier, and finally, the dreamer.
The dreamer is a tough one. The dreamer believes that success is right around the corner with the next gig, the next deal. They often get mixed up in get-rich-quick schemes because they are almost allergic to a 9-to-5 job. In fact, they have developed certain vocabulary, verbal tics. They'll say, I don't want to trade time for money. I'll do anything but work a 9-to-5. And so often they have made far less than someone who's working a very nice 9-to-5. Dreamers are very difficult to be partnered with. And the only way that dreamers can exist is that they are often subsidized. They often have their partner who's making money, or they have money from their parents, or there's some way that they are subsidized. To put it another way, if you have a partner who is a dreamer, who's always talking about the next gig, the next thing, but they haven't actually put up results, imagine you were to leave for 2 months. You were to take a round the world trip for 2 months. I bet you they would be able to figure out how to run the household. I bet you they would get a job if they had to. But often you will find that one partner is subsidizing the other. The tough part about this, especially partners of dreamers, see, dreamers are not reading my book. They don't want to read a book about money. They're perfectly content because their partner typically picks up the slack. If you have a partner like this, you have to decide, is this person part of your rich life? You have to have a series of difficult conversations with them, which I would encourage you to engage a therapist for. And you have to make a decision about what boundaries you are willing to set for yourself. I do believe anyone can change, yes. But the biggest red flag when it comes to money and couples is if one partner is not willing to talk about money. We can fix almost anything else, but it's very difficult to fix that.
Ramit Sethi, you are the host of How to Get Rich on Netflix. You are the author of the best-selling book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which I see in every Barnes & Noble across the country right now. It's always on the table, which is a good spot. And you are the author of this new book, Money for Couples. No more stress, no more fights, just a 10-step plan to create your rich life together. Highly recommend this book, if nothing less, to figure out which of these 4 money types you are and how do you have a positive money conversation and get your own conscious spending plan in place. Ramit, thanks for joining us today.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.